A company wants to predict the future cost of their cloud usage. Which of the following steps or tools could help them? Select two answers. A. Use the total cost of ownership (TCO) calculator to estimate long-term costs. B. Implement load balancing to reduce server stress. C. Track and monitor resource usage in real time to identify cost patterns. D. Set up multiple virtual machines to spread traffic. The correct answers are A. Use the total cost of ownership (TCO) calculator to estimate long-term costs. C. Track and monitor resource usage in real time to identify cost patterns. Now let's explain why those two are correct. Starting with the TCO calculator, this tool is specifically designed to help organizations estimate the overall cost of using cloud services over time. It takes into account various factors such as resource types, usage duration, and associated costs, enabling accurate long-term budgeting. This makes it ideal for predicting future cloud spending. Moving on to tracking and monitoring resource usage, doing this in real time allows companies to observe usage patterns, spot spikes or inefficiencies, and make data-driven decisions. For instance, if a business notices higher than expected usage at certain times, they can investigate the cause and adjust workloads or schedules to optimize cost. On the other hand, while load balancing helps distribute traffic efficiently, it's more about performance optimization rather than cost prediction. Similarly, setting up multiple virtual machines relates to scaling and ensuring availability, not directly forecasting expenses. So, the right steps for predicting future cloud costs are using the TCO calculator and monitoring resource usage in real time. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. The shared responsibility model in IaaS means the cloud provider manages all security measures. False users are responsible for software updates and security patches in IaaS. True. In an IaaS model, the cloud provider handles physical infrastructure security. True. The shared responsibility model applies only to IaaS and not to other cloud service models. False. Now let's go ahead and explain each of these one by one. Starting with the first statement, it's false because in the infrastructure as a service model, security is a shared responsibility. The cloud provider takes care of the physical infrastructure, like the servers, storage, and networking, while the user is responsible for securing their data, operating systems, and applications. The second statement is true. When using IaaS, users must install updates, apply security patches, and configure firewalls for their virtual machines. Just like maintaining your personal computer, you're responsible for keeping it safe. The third statement is also true. The cloud provider ensures the security of the physical data center, including power, cooling, and hardware security, while users focus on what's inside the virtual environment. Lastly, the fourth statement is false. The shared responsibility model is not exclusive to IaaS. It also applies to platform as a service and software as a service, but the split of responsibilities differs depending on the service model. So, understanding who is responsible for what helps you stay secure and compliant in the cloud. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Inheritance allows users in a group to receive the same permissions assigned to the group. True, custom roles can only be assigned at the subscription level. False, role-based access control (RBAC) enforces the principle of least privilege. True, once assigned, a role's permissions cannot be modified. False. Let's now take a moment to break down and explain each of these answers. First, inheritance is marked true because when users are placed into a group, they automatically inherit the permissions granted to that group. This simplifies access management, especially in large organizations where assigning roles individually would be inefficient. Next, the second statement is false. Custom roles are not limited to just the subscription level. They can be assigned at various scopes, including the management group, subscription, resource group, or even individual resources, depending on the access needed. The third statement is true. RBAC is built around the principle of least privilege, which means users should only have access to the resources they absolutely need to perform their job. For example, someone in finance might only be granted read-only access to billing data, not the ability to modify virtual machines. Lastly, the fourth statement is false because assigned roles can indeed be modified. Azure allows administrators to update custom role definitions, or reassign users to different roles as organizational needs change. So, understanding how inheritance, custom roles, and RBAC work helps you manage cloud security and access more effectively. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. Azure provides multiple managed services, including Azure Kubernetes Service, which simplifies container orchestration, and Azure Machine Learning, which automates model training and deployment. For large-scale data processing, Azure Synapse Analytics integrates with Azure Data Lake to analyze massive data sets. Now let's walk through each part of the sentence and explain the answers. We start with Azure Kubernetes Service. This is a managed container orchestration platform that takes care of deploying, scaling, and operating Kubernetes environments. It simplifies the management of containers, which is why container orchestration fits perfectly here. Next is Azure Machine Learning. This service automates much of the machine learning workflow, including training models, scaling compute resources, and deploying those models efficiently. So the phrase model training and deployment accurately describes what it handles. Then we move to Azure Synapse Analytics. This is designed for large-scale data processing and analytics, particularly for handling massive amounts of structured and unstructured data. Lastly, Azure Synapse Analytics integrates with Azure Data Lake. Data Lake provides scalable storage that Synapse can query directly, enabling advanced data analytics on large data sets. Together, these services provide powerful cloud-based tools for modern, data-intensive applications and workflows. For each cloud service model listed below, drag it to the appropriate boxes in the correct match column to match it against its description in the option column. Provides virtualized computing resources, infrastructure as a service, IaaS, supports application deployment without managing OS, platform as a service, PaaS, offers ready-to-use applications, software as a service, SaaS, suitable for running and managing databases, platform as a service, ideal for hosting websites and scalable applications, infrastructure as a service, IaaS, users access applications hosted in the cloud, software as a service, SaaS, provides an environment for app development and testing, platform as a service, PaaS, delivers fully managed software accessible over the internet, software as a service. Now let's take a moment to explain these matches in context. First, infrastructure as a service is designed to provide the foundational computing resources like virtual machines, networking, and storage. So when we say it provides virtualized computing resources or is ideal for hosting websites, we're referring to the flexibility and control IaaS offers over infrastructure. Next, platform as a service abstracts much of the infrastructure and OS management, making it perfect for application deployment without managing the OS, running databases, and developing and testing apps. Developers just focus on writing code. Then comes software as a service, which is the most user-facing model. It delivers ready-made applications over the internet. That's why it fits descriptions like offers ready-to-use applications, users access applications hosted in the cloud, and delivers fully managed software. In summary, knowing how these models differ helps you choose the right service for your needs, whether it's control, speed, or convenience you're after. Which scenario demonstrates a need for cloud elasticity? Select one answer. A. John manages an image processing application hosted on Azure. Traffic to the application increases by 67% on weekends and drops to less than 30% during weekdays. John wants the VMs to automatically scale to handle these fluctuations without subscribing to a high-cost dedicated plan. B. Jane runs a personal hygiene tracking application hosted on Azure. She wants the application to remain operational at all times, including weekends, without any downtime. The application serves as the backend for a mobile app that relies on real-time data. C. Alexei oversees a massive database on Azure used by an online fashion retail site. The database stores preferences for millions of customers, and Alexei needs guaranteed 100% network uptime for seamless user experiences. D. Tina is a network administrator for Contoso International. She requires a private on-premises network securely connected to a public cloud. Strict security measures must ensure that access to the cloud is possible only via API calls. Correct answer, A. John manages an image processing application hosted on Azure. Let's take a moment to unpack why this scenario reflects cloud elasticity. Elasticity refers to the ability of a cloud system to automatically increase or decrease resource allocation based on workload demand. In John's case, his application's usage spikes dramatically on weekends and drops during the week. This fluctuating traffic pattern is a classic use case for elasticity, as he wants the infrastructure to scale up and down automatically without paying for unused capacity. Now looking at Jane's scenario, her priority is consistent uptime, which relates more to reliability than inelasticity. Alexa is focused on ensuring no downtime and fast access, which points to availability and performance, not dynamic scaling. Tina's situation revolves around hybrid networking and tight security controls, which is a cloud connectivity and protection concern, not elasticity. So John's need to adapt resource levels to workload demand is what defines cloud elasticity. A company has sensitive data that they want to keep entirely within their own infrastructure, but they also want the flexibility to scale to a public cloud when demand increases. What cloud model should they adopt? Select one answer. A, multi-cloud. B, public cloud. C, hybrid cloud. D, private cloud. Correct answer, C, hybrid cloud. Now let's go ahead and explain why that is the right choice. A hybrid cloud model combines the strengths of both private and public clouds. It allows a company to keep sensitive data secured on premises while still gaining the flexibility to scale out to public cloud services when traffic spikes or workloads increase. This setup provides a balance between control, security, and scalability. Now, if we look at the private cloud option, it offers control and security, but lacks the ability to dynamically scale using external cloud resources. Public cloud, on the other hand, does allow scalability, but doesn't support storing sensitive data on your own infrastructure, which was a key requirement in the scenario. As for multi-cloud, this approach uses multiple public cloud providers for various services, but it doesn't create an integrated environment between private and public clouds. Therefore, it doesn't meet the need for unified flexibility and local data control. So, hybrid cloud is the best fit when a business needs secure local storage alongside scalable cloud infrastructure. Which of the following best describes Azure Arc? Select one answer. A technology for managing cloud resources across public, private, and hybrid environments. B, a tool for managing on-premises physical servers only. C, a service dedicated to managing databases in Azure. D, a solution for running VMware workloads in a public cloud. Correct answer, A, a technology for managing cloud resources across public, private, and hybrid environments. Let's go ahead and explain why this is the right choice. Azure Arc is designed to extend Azure's management and governance capabilities beyond just Azure itself. It allows you to manage servers, Kubernetes clusters, and even databases across different environments, whether on-premises, in another cloud, or at the edge. That makes option A the most complete and accurate description. Now, option B falls short because Azure Arc is not limited to just managing physical servers. It also supports virtual machines, containers, and more across various locations. Option C sounds somewhat related, as Azure Arc can manage certain databases, but database management is only a part of its broader capabilities. As for option D, while Azure Arc can handle VMware workloads, its focus is not exclusive to that. It's about centralizing control across environments, not just supporting a specific workload. So ultimately, Azure Arc stands out as a versatile technology for managing resources consistently across mixed environments. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. Azure Virtual Desktop provides multi-session deployments for Windows 10 or Windows 11 Enterprise, which allows multiple concurrent users on a single VM. Now let's take a moment to explain how this works. Azure Virtual Desktop is a cloud-based desktop and app virtualization service that lets users access a full Windows desktop remotely. What makes it powerful is the support for multi-session, meaning several users can log into the same virtual machine at the same time, just like in a terminal server setup. This functionality is specifically available for Windows 10 and Windows 11 Enterprise editions. That means organizations can save costs by reducing the number of virtual machines required to serve multiple users while still providing a modern Windows experience. So, if you're designing a scalable remote desktop environment Azure Virtual Desktop with multi-session Windows 10 or 11 Enterprise is your go-to option. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. A virtual network requires an address space, and all subnets inside the VNet must have IP ranges that fit within the parent address space. Now let's explain why this is the correct choice. A virtual network, or VNet, in Azure is a core networking component that provides private, isolated network environments for your Azure resources. It must be assigned an address space, typically using CIDR notation, which defines the range of IP addresses available within that network. Subnets are then carved out of this parent address space. They are smaller, addressable segments within the VNet. For instance, if your VNet address space is 10.0.0.0r16, you might define a subnet like 10.0.1.0.24, which falls neatly within that range. By comparison, a resource group does not define any networking details. A load balancer distributes traffic but doesn't deal with IP address allocation. Firewalls secure traffic, and virtual machines connect to networks, but neither of them defines or divides address spaces. So in summary, the VNet defines the big picture of the network space, and subnets divide that space into manageable sections for organizing resources. For each premium Azure storage type, drag it to the appropriate description in the correct match column based on its key characteristics. Provides high-performance storage for block blob data, premium block blobs, optimized for virtual disk storage and third-party API-based storage solutions. Premium page blobs, ideal for enterprise applications needing high-speed file shares. Premium file shares uses solid-state drives, SSDs, instead of HDDs for enhanced performance. Premium block blobs and premium file shares and premium page blobs supports server message block, SMB, and network file system NFS protocols. Premium file shares suitable for AI and IoT workloads needing fast object storage. Premium block blobs. Let's now take a moment to explain how each storage type aligns with its key use case. Premium block blobs are designed for high throughput and low latency access to unstructured object data. That makes them ideal for scenarios like AI models or IoT data pipelines, where fast access to lots of small objects is critical. Premium page blobs, on the other hand, are optimized for I/O-intensive workloads such as unmanaged virtual hard disks. Although Azure is phasing out unmanaged disks, page blobs remain a solid choice for compatible third-party storage applications. Premium file shares offer file-based storage that supports both Windows and Linux environments via SMB and NFS protocols. Because of their speed and flexibility, they are perfect for enterprise file share needs across a range of workloads. Lastly, all these premium storage options rely on SSDs to ensure enhanced performance compared to traditional HDDs, which is why that match includes multiple correct answers. So, matching each use case with the right storage type helps you choose efficiently based on performance, protocol support, and data type. For each Azure service, drag it to the appropriate boxes in the correct match column based on its primary function. Distributes incoming network traffic across multiple virtual machines at Layer 4. Azure Load Balancer provides DNS-based global traffic distribution to improve availability. Azure Traffic Manager offers Layer 7 load balancing with SSL termination and web traffic routing. Azure Application Gateway enhances web applications with global load balancing and security features. Azure Front Door supports content caching and acceleration for web applications. Azure Front Door. Let's go ahead and explain how these services differ in function. Starting with Azure Load Balancer, it works at layer 4 of the OSI model, meaning it routes traffic based on IP address and port, typically distributing incoming traffic among multiple virtual machines to ensure high availability. Next, Azure Traffic Manager is not a traditional load balancer, but a DNS-based traffic director. It improves availability by directing users to the nearest or most responsive region based on metrics like latency or geographic location. Then there's Azure Application Gateway, which operates at layer 7, the application layer. It supports more advanced routing features like URL-based routing and SSL termination, and it's ideal for web applications needing intelligent traffic distribution. Azure Front Door is designed for global web applications. It combines load balancing, security, and performance optimization. It also includes features like web application firewall and content caching, which help improve global responsiveness. So each of these services plays a unique role in managing traffic and availability, tailored to specific layers and use cases in the network stack. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. LRS is the best choice for critical applications requiring regional disaster recovery protection. False ZRS is recommended for applications requiring high availability within a region, but no cross-region replication. True GZRS offers better protection than LRS, ZRS, and GRS because it combines regional and zone redundancy. True RA GZRS is the best option for applications requiring cross-region disaster recovery with read access to replicated data. True. Let's break this down and explain why these answers are accurate. Starting with the first statement, it is false because locally redundant storage LRS only keeps data within a single data center. That means if that location is affected by an outage or disaster, your data could be lost. For disaster recovery, geo-redundant storage, GRSF, or geo-zone redundant storage should be used. The second statement is true. Zone redundant storage, ZRS, stores data across multiple availability zones in the same region. It helps ensure high availability in case one zone fails, but it does not protect against region-wide outages since it doesn't replicate to other regions. Now, the third statement is also true. GZRS combines the benefits of both ZRS and GRS. It provides redundancy within a region using availability zones, and it also replicates data to a secondary region. This makes it more resilient than LRS, ZRS, or GRS alone. Finally, the fourth statement is true as well. Read access GZRS ZRS builds on GZRS by allowing read access to the secondary region. This makes it perfect for disaster recovery scenarios where applications need to access data even when the primary region is unavailable. So, understanding these redundancy options is key to choosing the right level of availability and disaster recovery for your Azure workloads. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Azure ADDS is a managed domain service that does not require OS-level maintenance. True Azure ADDS extends an on-premises AD environment as a direct extension in Azure. False group policy, LDAP, NTLM, and Kerberos are supported in Azure ADDS. True Azure ADDS enables two-way synchronization between Entra ID and an on-premises AD. False. Now let's take a moment to explain each one of these. First, the statement about Azure ADDS being a managed domain service is true. Microsoft manages the domain controllers for you, so there's no need to worry about patching or OS-level maintenance. It's designed to offload the operational overhead of running domain services in the cloud. The second statement is false because Azure ADDS doesn't extend your on-premises AD directly. Instead, it creates a standalone managed domain that can be synchronized with Azure AD, but it isn't a seamless extension of your on-prem environment. Next, the third statement is true. Azure ADDS supports traditional AD features like group policy, LDAP, NTLM, and Kerberos, which makes it useful for legacy apps that require those protocols. Lastly, the fourth statement is false. Azure ADDS supports only one-way synchronization from Entra ID, formerly known as Azure AD, to Azure ADDS. It does not support syncing changes back to Entra ID or to on-premises AD. So, Azure ADDS provides managed domain services with legacy support, but doesn't function as a full AD replica. For each statement below, indicate whether it is true or false. Azure Files can be mounted as a drive on Windows, Linux, and Mac devices. True Azure Files supports both SMB and NFS protocols for file sharing. True Azure File Sync requires setting up an Azure virtual machine. False Azure Files must be used with Azure Blob Storage to function. False. Now let's walk through the reasoning behind each of these answers. Starting with the first statement, it is true. Azure Files supports mounting file shares using SMB and NFS protocols, which allows it to be used across a wide range of operating systems, including Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. This makes it a flexible solution for cross-platform file access. The second statement is also true. Azure Files supports the SMB protocol, commonly used by Windows, and NFS, which is popular in Linux environments. This dual protocol support enhances compatibility for different use cases. The third statement, however, is false. Azure File Sync doesn't require you to deploy an Azure VM. Instead, it installs an agent on your existing on-premises Windows file server to sync with Azure Files, extending your local file server capabilities to the cloud. Lastly, the fourth statement is false as well. Azure Files is independent of Azure Blob Storage. Although both are storage services in Azure, they serve different purposes and operate separately. Azure Files doesn't rely on blob storage to function. So overall, Azure Files is a powerful and flexible option for cloud-based file sharing across multiple platforms without the need for Azure VMs or blob storage dependency. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Conditional access ensures that external identities have the same level of security enforcement as internal users. True Azure B2B collaboration only supports Microsoft accounts for external authentication. False access reviews in Microsoft Entra ID allow organizations to revoke guest access if no longer needed. True conditional access can be used to enforce strong authentication policies for both internal and external users. True now, let's walk through the explanation for each one. The first statement is true. Conditional access policies can apply to both internal and external users. This ensures that external collaborators are held to the same security standards, including requirements like multi-factor authentication and device compliance. The second statement is false. Azure B2B collaboration does not limit external authentication to Microsoft accounts. In fact, it supports several identity providers like Google, Facebook, and even corporate identities via federation. This makes collaboration much more flexible. The third statement is true. Microsoft Entra ID includes access review capabilities that help organizations periodically evaluate guest access. If access is no longer needed, it can be revoked automatically or manually, enhancing security. And the fourth statement is also true. Conditional access enables strong authentication enforcement, such as requiring MFA, compliant devices, or user risk checks. These policies can be enforced regardless of whether the user is internal or external. So, in summary, conditional access and Entra ID together provide a powerful toolkit for managing access securely across all types of users. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Locally redundant storage, LRS, keeps 3 copies of data within the same Azure data center. True geo-redundant storage, GRS, keeps copies of data in 2 separate Azure regions. True zone redundant storage, ZRS, replicates data across multiple availability zones within the same region. True read access geo-redundant storage, RAGRS, allows read-only access to the replicated data in a secondary region. True. Let's go ahead and explain each of these to better understand Azure storage redundancy options. Starting with LRS, this option stores 3 copies of your data within a single data center, which protects against hardware failures but doesn't offer resilience against data center-wide or regional outages. That's why it's best for low-cost, low-risk scenarios. GRS, on the other hand, stores your data in one Azure region and asynchronously replicates it to a paired region, giving you protection against complete regional failure. It's the go-to for applications requiring geographic redundancy. ZRS takes a slightly different approach. It replicates data across multiple availability zones within the same region. This provides better availability than LRS because your data spans physically separate data centers, all within the same region. Finally, RAGRS builds on GRS by providing read-only access to the replica in the secondary region, which is extremely valuable for disaster recovery scenarios where you need data access even when the primary region is down. Altogether, these options let you choose your level of redundancy and cost depending on your specific data availability and durability needs. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. The hot access tier is optimized for frequently accessed data. True. The cool access tier is optimized for infrequently accessed data and requires data to be stored for at least 30 days. True, the archive access tier is suitable for short-term data storage. False, the cold access tier requires data to be stored for at least 90 days. True, let's walk through these statements to understand why they are correct or incorrect. The first one is true. The hot access tier is designed for data that's accessed often, like frequently used images, reports, or logs. It offers low latency and high availability, though at a higher storage cost. The second statement is also true. The cool tier is for infrequently accessed data and becomes cost-effective only if the data is stored for at least 30 days. Accessing it more frequently would incur higher charges. Now, the third statement is false. The archive tier is not suitable for short-term storage. It's specifically designed for long-term data retention, such as regulatory backups or compliance data, and data should remain in that tier for at least 180 days. Finally, the fourth statement is true. The cold tier, a relatively newer option, targets data that needs to be stored for at least 90 days, offering lower costs than the cool or hot tiers, but with higher retrieval costs. So each access tier in Azure is designed for specific storage patterns, balancing cost with access frequency and retention requirements. Azure App Service supports which of the following application types? Select three answers. A. Web apps. B. Mobile apps. C. API apps. D. Logic apps. Correct answers: A. Web apps. B. Mobile apps. C. API apps. Let's go ahead and explain how each of these fits within Azure App Service. Azure App Service is a platform as a service offering designed to host and manage modern web applications. Web apps are one of its core use cases. You can build and deploy websites using frameworks like .NET, Java, Node.js, and Python, all managed through Azure's scalable infrastructure. Now, mobile apps are also supported. While App Service doesn't host the mobile frontend itself, it provides robust backend support for mobile applications, including features like authentication, push notifications, and offline sync. API apps are equally supported. These are typically back-end services that expose RESTful APIs and are hosted using the same app service environment. Developers can publish their APIs and integrate them with web or mobile frontends or in their other services. Logic apps, on the other hand, are not part of Azure App Service. They belong to a separate service known as Azure Logic Apps, which is specifically built for creating automated workflows and integrating different services without writing much code. So the best way to think about it is Azure App Service handles code-heavy application hosting, web, mobile backend, and APIs, while Logic Apps is code-light, focused on orchestration and automation. What is an Azure storage account named Storage001 an example of? Select only one answer. A. A resource. B. A resource group. C. A resource manager. D. A subscription. Correct answer: A. A resource. Let's take a moment to explain why this is the right choice. In Azure, a resource is any manageable item that you create and work with. That includes things like storage accounts, virtual machines, databases, web apps, and more. In this case, SOSH Storage001 is the name of a specific storage account, which means it's a clear example of a resource. Now let's briefly look at why the other options are incorrect. A resource group is not an individual item like Storage001. It's a logical container used to hold and manage related resources together. Think of it as a folder for your resources. A resource manager refers to Azure Resource Manager, which is the underlying service that deploys and manages your resources. It's the tool, not the object itself. And finally, a subscription is a billing boundary. It organizes resources and determines limits and access control, but it's not the resource you deploy and interact with directly. So to sum it all up, when you create a named item like Storage001, you are working with an Azure resource. Arrange the following steps to connect on-premises Active Directory with Microsoft Entra ID using Microsoft Entra Connect. 1. Install Microsoft Entra Connect on the on-premises server. 2. Configure synchronization settings. 3. Enable synchronization for identities. 4. Synchronize changes between Active Directory and Microsoft Entra ID. Let's break down these steps in the correct order to understand why they flow this way. The first step is to install Microsoft Entra Connect on your on-premises server. This tool is the bridge that links your local Active Directory to Microsoft Entra ID, formerly known as Azure AD. Once installation is complete, the next step is to configure synchronization settings. This involves deciding what to sync: users, groups, passwords, and how frequently it should happen. After configuring the settings, you then enable synchronization for identities. This activates the sync engine, preparing it to move data between the two directories. Finally, you synchronize changes. This step ensures that updates made in the on-prem AD, like a password change or new user, are reflected in Entra ID. This sequence ensures a secure, accurate, and seamless identity synchronization between your on-prem and cloud environments. A manufacturing company has several on-premises facilities that need a dedicated high-speed connection to Azure for real-time data processing. They are also interested in a secure failover path in case of connection failure. Which options should they consider to meet these needs? Select two answers: A. Express route, B. Route-based VPN with active-active configuration, C. Policy-based VPN, D. Virtual network peering. Correct answers: A. Express route, and B. Route-based VPN with active-active configuration. Let's take a moment to explain how each option fits or doesn't fit the scenario. ExpressRoute is the best choice when you need a private, dedicated, and high-throughput connection to Azure. It's ideal for real-time data transfer between on-premises and the cloud because it bypasses the public internet, offering greater reliability and lower latency. Meanwhile, a route-based VPN with active-active configuration is a solid backup option. It supports dynamic routing and can be set up in an active-active mode for high availability. If ExpressRoute goes down, this VPN can maintain connectivity with minimal interruption. On the other hand, a policy-based VPN is too limited. It doesn't support advanced routing scenarios or failover paths, so it's not suitable for high availability requirements. Virtual network peering is great for connecting Azure virtual networks, but it doesn't help with connecting your on-premises environment to Azure. That eliminates it from consideration in this use case. So if you need both high performance and a secure backup connection, ExpressRoute with a route-based VPN gives you a dependable and scalable solution. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Virtual machine scale sets automate the scaling of VMs based on demand or a predefined schedule. True availability sets ensure all VMs in a group reboot simultaneously for maintenance. False. A fault domain groups VMs based on common power and network sources. True. Azure availability sets allow updates to be applied without taking down all VMs at once. True. Let's take a moment to explain why these answers are correct. Virtual machine scale sets indeed automate the process of scaling virtual machines. This means Azure can add or remove VM instances automatically based on demand, such as during traffic spikes or per a set schedule, helping manage performance and cost effectively. Availability sets, however, are designed to prevent all VMs in a group from rebooting at once. Instead of simultaneous reboots, they use update domains to spread VMs across different update cycles, ensuring that some instances remain available during planned maintenance. Next, fault domains help protect against hardware failures by distributing VMs across different physical hardware, power supplies, and network switches. That way, a failure in one domain doesn't impact all your resources. Finally, Azure availability sets do allow for controlled rolling updates. With update domains and fault domains in place, Azure can apply patches and maintenance without taking down the entire application, which keeps your services up and running. So in summary, Azure uses availability sets and scale sets to keep your applications resilient and responsive, whether you're scaling for growth or maintaining uptime during updates. Which tool automatically keeps files between an on-premises Windows server and an Azure cloud environment updated? Select one answer. A. Azure File Sync, B. Azure Storage Explorer C, AzCopy, D. Azure Backup. The correct answer is Azure File Sync. Now let's explain why that's the case. Azure File Sync is specifically designed to keep files synchronized automatically between an on-premises Windows server and Azure Files. This means whenever a file changes on the local server, that change is automatically reflected in the cloud and vice versa. This is especially useful for businesses that want centralized cloud storage without giving up their on-site infrastructure. Azure Storage Explorer, although helpful for manually managing and browsing Azure storage accounts, doesn't offer synchronization functionality. It's a visual tool, not an automation tool. AzCopy, on the other hand, is a powerful command line utility used to transfer files between your local environment and Azure, but it requires manual execution. So while it's efficient for one-time transfers or scripts, it doesn't provide continuous updates. Lastly, Azure Backup is designed for backup and recovery, not file syncing. It protects your data by storing point-in-time versions in case of disaster, but doesn't ensure that changes in one environment are mirrored in another. So When you're thinking automatic and two-way updates between on-prem and cloud, always go with Azure File Sync. Which of the following is not a connectivity model supported by Azure ExpressRoute? Select one answer. A, any-to-any connectivity, B, point-to-point Ethernet connection, C, virtual cross-connection in colocation facilities, D, point-to-site VPN connection. The correct answer is D, point-to-site VPN connection. Let's walk through the explanation. Azure ExpressRoute is designed to provide high-speed, private connectivity between your on-premises infrastructure and Microsoft Cloud services. It supports several enterprise-grade connectivity models, including any-to-any connectivity, which is ideal for integrating wide area networks. It also supports point-to-point Ethernet connections, where you link a single location to Azure. In colocation facilities, ExpressRoute allows for virtual cross-connections, enabling customers to connect to Azure directly through a facility where both Azure and the customer are present. However, point-to-site VPN connections are not part of ExpressRoute's model. These are typically used to allow individual client devices, such as laptops, to connect securely to Azure via a VPN. That functionality is covered under Azure VPN Gateway, not ExpressRoute. So in summary, if you're dealing with large-scale enterprise connectivity, ExpressRoute has you covered, except when it comes to individual device VPNs, which are outside its scope. You are part of a development team that wants to explore Azure services without incurring costs to your personal or company account. You need temporary access to Azure resources to complete a training module, and you prefer that any resources you create are automatically deleted afterward. Which Azure feature or account type best suits your needs? Select one answer. A, Azure Free Account. B, Azure Free Student Account. C, Microsoft Learn Sandbox. D, Paid Azure subscription with spending limits. The correct answer is C, Microsoft Learn Sandbox. Now let's explain why. The Microsoft Learn Sandbox is designed exactly for these kinds of training situations. It gives you temporary access to Azure resources during learning modules on Microsoft Learn, and most importantly, it automatically deletes any resources you create when the module ends. That means no surprise charges and no need to worry about manual cleanup. In contrast, the Azure Free account does provide limited free resources, but you're responsible for deleting them, and you could be charged if you forget. Similarly, the Azure Free Student account is great for students, but doesn't include automated cleanup either. Finally, a paid subscription with spending limits still requires manual oversight and isn't suited for one-off learning activities. So for anyone focused on learning Azure hands-on with zero risk, the Sandbox is the ideal solution. Your organization uses Active Directory on-premises but wants to leverage cloud applications securely with a consistent identity experience. Which service would be best for synchronizing identities across both environments? Select one answer. A, Azure Active Directory B2C, B, Microsoft Entra Domain Services, C, Microsoft Entra Connect, D, Microsoft Authenticator. The correct answer is C, Microsoft Entra Connect. Now let's walk through the explanation. Microsoft Entra Connect is the right tool because it bridges the gap between on-premises Active Directory and Microsoft Entra ID. It automatically synchronizes user identities, allowing users to sign in with the same credentials whether they're accessing applications hosted in the cloud or on-premises. That ensures a seamless and secure identity experience. In contrast, Azure Active Directory B2C is meant for managing identities of external consumers, like customers, not employees, and doesn't synchronize with on-prem AD. Meanwhile, Microsoft Entra Domain Services supports legacy protocols like LDAP and Kerberos, but doesn't provide identity synchronization. Finally, Microsoft Authenticator is simply a multi-factor authentication app used to verify user logins, not sync directories. So, for unified identity management across cloud and on-prem, Microsoft Entra Connect is the tool you need. Your company is building a recommendation engine that requires storing large amounts of unstructured data and providing real-time global access. Which Azure database service best fits requirement? Select one answer. A, Azure SQL Database. B, Azure Cosmos DB. C, Azure Synapse Analytics. D, Azure Data Lake. The correct answer is B, Azure Cosmos DB. Now let's explain why this is the best choice. Azure Cosmos DB is specifically designed for scenarios that require high-speed access to unstructured or semi-structured data globally. It offers low latency performance and automatic global distribution, which makes it perfect for real-time applications like recommendation engines, where speed and global reach are essential. On the other hand, Azure SQL Database is optimized for relational data and doesn't scale globally as efficiently for NoSQL workloads. Meanwhile, Azure Synapse Analytics is more suited for big data analytics and querying large data sets rather than serving real-time application requests. Lastly, Azure Data Lake is excellent for storing raw data, but it's not built to deliver real-time responses for application use cases. So when you need speed, scale, and structure flexibility for global data, Azure Cosmos DB is your go-to. For each directory service listed below, drag it to the appropriate boxes in the correct match column to match it against its description in the option column. Option 1, designed for on-premises identity management and authentication for corporate networks. Correct match. ActiveDirect. Option 2, a cloud-based identity and access management service that supports modern authentication protocols. Correct match. Microsoft Entra ID. Option 3, a managed service that provides legacy Active Directory features in Azure. Correct match. Azure AD Domain Services. Option 4 uses Kerberos and NTLM for authentication. Active Directory. Option 5 supports single sign-on SSO for cloud-based applications. Microsoft Entra ID. Option 6 provides domain join functionality for virtual machines in Azure. Azure AD Domain Services. Now, let's explain the reasoning behind each match. Starting with Active Directory, it's the traditional on-premises solution used for identity management within corporate networks. It uses legacy authentication methods like Kerberos and NTLM, which are still widely supported in many enterprise environments. Moving on to Microsoft Entra ID, this service, formerly Azure AD, is built for cloud identity. It enables secure sign-ins and access management for SaaS apps and cloud resources. It's especially known for supporting single sign-on and modern authentication protocols such as OAuth 2.0. Then there's Azure AD Domain Services, which replicates legacy AD capabilities in the cloud. It's ideal for organizations that need to run older apps in Azure that still rely on domain joins or group policy, but don't want to manage domain controllers themselves. So in summary, we've aligned each directory service to its specific use case and capabilities, ensuring a clear understanding of how identity is managed across on-premises and cloud environments. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Conditional access can require users to authenticate with MFA before accessing corporate resources. Answer. True. Conditional access automatically grants access to all corporate applications after a successful sign-in. Answer. False. Conditional access policies can be applied based on device compliance. Answer. True. Conditional access policies cannot be used to block legacy authentication methods. Answer. False. Let's go ahead and explain why these are the correct answers. Conditional access is designed to enhance security by evaluating conditions before granting access. One of the most common conditions is enforcing multi-factor authentication. This means users may be required to verify their identity with a second factor, such as a mobile app or SMS code, before accessing sensitive data. Next, conditional access does not simply grant access after a successful sign-in. Access is determined by evaluating a set of defined policies, which could include the user's location, device compliance, risk level, or MFA status. So a successful sign-in alone doesn't guarantee access. Now, conditional access can also evaluate the compliance status of a user's device. For instance, it can block access from an unmanaged personal laptop but allow it from a company-issued device that meets security standards. Lastly, while it may seem like conditional access only applies to modern authentication, it can actually block legacy protocols such as IMAP or POP3, which do not support MFA. Blocking these older methods helps tighten your security posture. That's how conditional access gives organizations precise control over who can access what, from where, and under what conditions. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. Entra External ID for partners allows organizations to manage guest users by creating a user object inside Entra ID. Now let's break that down with an explanation. When organizations collaborate with external partners, They need a secure and manageable way to control guest access. Entra External ID enables this by creating what's known as a user object. This object represents the external user in the directory and gives the organization control over access permissions, policies, and lifecycle. The second part, inside Entra ID, refers to where this user object resides. Microsoft Entra ID, formerly Azure AD, is the identity service that manages these users in the cloud. It provides a centralized way to handle both internal and external identities using tools like conditional access and identity governance. Some might confuse this with terms like cloud directory or IAM system, but those are either too general or don't specifically describe the structure Microsoft uses. So the correct match is user object inside Entra ID. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. An Azure Policy Initiative is a collection of multiple related policies. The answer is true. Initiatives cannot be used to track compliance across multiple policies. The answer is false. Azure Policy Initiatives help organizations achieve broader compliance goals. The answer is true. Initiatives in Azure Policy apply policies randomly to different resources. The answer is false. Now let's go ahead and explain why these answers are correct. First, Azure Policy Initiatives are essentially a group of related policy definitions bundled together. This makes it easier for organizations to manage multiple policies that aim to achieve a common compliance goal, rather than assigning each policy one by one. Next, the idea that initiatives cannot be used to track compliance is incorrect. In fact, initiatives are specifically designed to provide a unified view of compliance across all included policies. So if you're managing dozens of policies, an initiative lets you see overall compliance in one dashboard. Additionally, Azure Policy Initiatives help organizations meet broader compliance targets by enforcing a consistent set of rules across cloud resources. This ensures that all teams and departments are aligned with governance standards. Finally, initiatives do not apply policies randomly. They work within the scope you define, whether it's a subscription, resource group, or management group, ensuring the enforcement is structured and predictable. So remember, initiatives group policies, track compliance, support broader goals, and apply them systematically. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Using Azure's pay-as-you-go pricing model provides flexibility without any long-term commitment. The answer is true. Consumption-based pricing means that you pay for resources only when they are actively in use. The answer is false. The pricing calculator automatically provisions resources selected in the calculation. The answer is false. Azure regions are grouped into zones to help determine network bandwidth costs. The answer is true. Now let's take a moment to explain why each of these is accurate. First, the pay-as-you-go model allows users to consume Azure services on demand without the need to commit to a long-term plan. This gives great flexibility, especially for workloads that fluctuate or are temporary. However, when it comes to consumption-based pricing, many people assume you're charged only when resources are actively doing something. In reality, Azure bills you for provisioned capacity, which includes resources that are reserved or running continuously, even if they're idle. Next, it's important to note that the Azure pricing calculator is simply a forecasting tool. It doesn't deploy anything. It just helps you estimate your monthly costs based on your configuration and region selections. Lastly, Azure regions are grouped into billing zones, and these zones help determine how data transfer costs are applied. For instance, transferring data between two regions in the same zone might be cheaper than transferring between regions in different zones. So, while pricing seems straightforward, there are many details that affect how you're billed in practice. A company is concerned that critical resources in Azure might be accidentally deleted. They want to ensure that certain resources can be modified but not deleted. Which type of lock should they apply? A. Read-only lock, delete lock. C. Azure policy, D. Role-based access control, RBAC answer. B. Delete lock. Let's explain why this is the correct answer. The delete lock is specifically designed for scenarios like this. It prevents users from deleting a resource, but it still allows them to make modifications. This is ideal when a resource is actively in use and dates may be needed, but you want to avoid the risk of someone accidentally removing it. Now, a read-only lock would go too far in the opposite direction. It blocks both deletion and modification, which isn't what the company wants. They still need to update the resource. Azure Policy helps enforce rules for resource configuration and compliance, but it doesn't actually stop someone from deleting a resource unless explicitly configured with a deny effect, which isn't the same as a lock. Lastly, role-based access control, or RBAC, is used to define who can do what within a subscription, but it doesn't directly prevent accidental deletion the way a resource lock does. So when the goal is to allow changes but block deletions, the delete lock is the right tool to use. Which of the following features is not part of Application Insight's monitoring capabilities? A. Monitoring request rates and failure rates. B. Monitoring dependency performance. C. Monitoring page load times. D. Monitoring global Azure service outages. Correct answer, D. Monitoring global Azure service outages. Let's go ahead and explain this. Application Insights is part of Azure Monitor, and it's mainly used to track and improve the performance and reliability of your applications. It monitors request rates, failure rates, and helps you detect issues in real time by providing deep insights into application behaviors. It also includes dependency performance tracking. For instance, if your app calls an external API or database, Application Insights can tell you how long those calls take and if they're failing. Similarly, it provides data on page load times, which is especially useful for web apps to understand user experience. However, when it comes to monitoring global Azure service outages, that's outside the scope of Application Insights. That responsibility falls to Azure Service Health. Azure Service Health notifies you about issues affecting Azure services in your region or globally, including planned maintenance. So while Application Insights gives you deep visibility into your app's health and performance, it doesn't track Azure-wide service disruptions. That's why the correct answer is monitoring global Azure service outages. An administrator wants to configure Azure Service Health to monitor outages and planned maintenance while also generating reports that analyze incidents. What type of official incident report can be shared with stakeholders for monitoring and planning purposes? A. Service status report. B. Root cause analysis, RCA report. C. Planned maintenance report. D. Incident summary report. Correct answer, B. Root cause analysis report. Now let's walk through the explanation. When organizations experience service disruptions, simply knowing that an issue occurred isn't enough. They need to understand what caused it, what was affected, and how to prevent similar incidents in the future. That's where the root cause analysis, or RCA report, comes in. It's an official report generated by Azure Service Health that provides a detailed breakdown of the incident, including the root cause, the scope of impact, and the mitigation steps taken. In contrast, the service status report shows the current health of Azure services, but doesn't go into the why or how of past incidents. Likewise, the planned maintenance report only focuses on upcoming scheduled events, not on what happened during disruptions. Finally, the incident summary report isn't an official Azure Service Health report type, which makes it unsuitable for formal stakeholder sharing or planning. So, if the goal is to both inform stakeholders and plan for the future with detailed incident data, the right choice is clearly the root cause analysis report. What two components could you use to implement an infrastructure as code deployment? A. Bicep. B. ARM templates. C. Azure Policy. D. Azure Arc. Correct answers, A. Bicep and B. ARM templates. Now let's break it down with a quick explanation. Infrastructure as code means managing and provisioning computing infrastructure using machine-readable configuration files. In Azure, Bicep and ARM templates are the go-to tools for this purpose. Bicep is a domain-specific language that simplifies writing code to deploy Azure resources. Think of it as a cleaner, more human-readable alternative to JSON. Meanwhile, our ARM templates are JSON-based files that define infrastructure configurations and can be deployed declaratively through Azure Resource Manager. On the other hand, Azure Policy helps enforce compliance across your resources, but doesn't provision or define infrastructure. Similarly, Azure Arc is great for managing resources across hybrid and multi-cloud environments, but it doesn't offer infrastructure as code functionality on its own. So if your goal is to implement infrastructure as code in Azure, your focus should be on Bicep and ARM templates. What Azure feature can help stay organized and track usage based on metadata associated with resources? A. Tags, tracers, C. Values, D. Resource groups. Correct answer A. Tags. Let's walk through the explanation. Tags in Azure are key value pairs that let you attach metadata to resources. This is incredibly helpful when you want to group resources logically across different services, subscriptions, or resource groups. For instance, if you're running multiple projects or managing resources by department or environment, like HR or development, you can tag each resource accordingly. This helps track costs, usage, and organization with much greater precision. Now, tracers is not an Azure feature, so that's not applicable here. Values, while they might sound useful, aren't a standalone feature for organizing or tracking resources. And although resource groups are useful for structuring your resources, they don't provide the kind of metadata-driven tracking and cost analysis that tags offer. So if you're aiming for smarter organization and deeper visibility into resource usage, tags are your best option. Your team is migrating workloads to Azure and needs to understand potential cost savings over time. Select two tools that would be beneficial for comparing Azure costs to on-premises infrastructure and estimating provisioned resource expenses. A. Pricing calculator. B. TCO calculator. C. Azure Advisor. D. Cost alerts. Correct answers: A. Pricing calculator. B. TCO calculator. Now let's go ahead and explain these answers. The pricing calculator is a planning tool that lets you estimate the cost of Azure services before deployment. It allows you to simulate various configurations and understand how much different resource combinations will cost, which helps in making budgeting decisions ahead of time. On the other hand, the TCO calculator, or total cost of ownership calculator, helps compare the cost of running workloads in Azure against traditional on-premises setups. This is especially useful for long-term planning, giving you insight into potential savings from migrating to the cloud. In contrast, Azure Advisor gives recommendations to optimize performance, cost, and security, but it doesn't provide comparisons between Azure and on-prem environments. Meanwhile, cost alerts simply notify you when your spending exceeds a certain threshold. They don't assist in estimating or comparing costs during planning. So for accurate planning and financial analysis, pricing calculator and TCO calculator are the right tools to use. You have an Azure virtual machine that is accessed only between 9 and 1700 each day. What should you do to minimize costs but preserve the associated hard disks and data? Select only one answer. A. Deallocate the virtual machine when it is not needed. B. Delete the virtual machine when it is not needed. C. Implement privileged identity management. D. Resize the virtual machine to a smaller size. Correct answer: A. Deallocate the virtual machine when it is not needed. Now let's break it down and explain why this is the best choice. When you deallocate a virtual machine, you essentially stop it from using compute resources. That means you're no longer billed for the CPU and memory. However, Azure still preserves the attached disks and other data, so when you're ready to use the VM again, you can restart it with everything intact. This makes deallocation the most cost-effective option for workloads that run on a fixed schedule. In contrast, deleting the virtual machine removes both the VM and its associated resources, including the disks. That would lead to permanent data loss, which clearly doesn't fit the goal of preserving data. Now, privileged identity management, or PIM, is focused on managing access to resources by granting just-in-time roles. While it's important for security, it has no impact on the cost of running virtual machines. Lastly, resizing the virtual machine to a smaller size might reduce costs slightly, but you would still be charged for that VM 24/7, even when it's not in use. That's not ideal for a VM that's only needed during working hours. So, to save costs and still keep your data safe, the right action is to deallocate the virtual machine when it's not needed.